representing IECC, which stands for Inclusive Educational Curriculum Consultancy. It was basically founded, lived on experience, my own personal experience of having a child that went through the education system facing racism and discrimination. And as a result of that, with my own professional background, I was able to identify gaps in mainstream services and also extension of schools, workplaces, being a woman of colour myself and the challenges that I have faced. So in short, I'm representing IECC. We provide consultancy around policies and procedures, curriculum content. We also provide resources, inclusive educational resources, events management. And our slogan is, we're taking tick box exercises off the agenda. We want to make sure that we all have an obligation and a duty to uphold the fact that, we are all humans, we all have a right, and equitable, education is first and foremost. So with that being said, I am going to pass you on to the other director, which is Izzy. Thank you.
Thanks, Saraya. Yeah, so kind of founded on really vital lived experience, and that's kind of what informs everything that we do. We co-produce all the content that we design to reflect those lived experiences of individuals and to amplify those voices. So I am the other director of IECC. I've got some background in education. I worked as a learning support worker, but I've also got a bit of a political background. My degree is in politics and sociology, and I also work as a policy officer for a third sector organisation here in Wales. This content and this little presentation today was co-produced by with Joy from Afro Hair Academy Wales. Unfortunately, she wasn't able to be here today, but she has sent us a little video to just introduce you to the session and give you a little bit of an overview of who she is and Afro Hair Academy. So I'll just share that with you now.
Today, after the session or following the session, you will have a little bit. Welcome everyone to our session. I am Joy Jeddy, the founder of Afro Hair Academy Wales. The Academy was developed to enhance education, training across curriculums in Wales. And we hope today, after the session or following the session, you will have a little bit more of an insight into why it's important to embed this into the curriculum. So the curriculum really and truthfully should become more inclusive and cover most of the topics that people are struggling with when it comes to Afro and different textured hair. I hope that you enjoy the session today, and I hope everyone can take something away that they will embed into their education, training, or everyday life. Thank you for participating.
So that was just a little bit from Joy. She's based in Cardiff, in the heart of Cardiff actually, and that's where her salon is. She runs lots of different workshops and classes for apprenticeships and courses for young people to learn more about how to manage, style and care for Afro textured hair, something that currently isn't on the curriculum for beauty training, and it's a real gap that she's filling. So please do check Joy out. As I say, it's Afro Hair Academy and she's based in Cardiff. So we'll just dive into the themes of today, and I will again pass you over to Saraya that can introduce you to a bit of the aims of this session.
Thank you, Izzy. So in today's session, we're going to explore your part in the journey to an anti-racist Wales, just by introducing yourselves to themes and on dimensions of identity, really, and the deconstruction of the meaning of professionalism. What does that look like, and what does it mean to you? So the aim of the session, first and foremost, is to begin to open personal understanding of, what is identity to the stripped down form, really. And then we're going to begin to explore, methods and cover a boundary setting when it involves professionalism. And then also we want to be able to clearly define professionalism and start to challenge any existing biases within yourself or within your work space and culture. Thank you. We'll just move on. Okay, so when we think of identity, guys, you know, this relates to various features and characteristics of individuals. So as you can see on the slide, you know, there's many branches to identity. So this may include sexuality, the values and religions, race and ethnicity, status and socio-economic status as well, and history and traditions. So there's some of the key factors that we interpret as being part of our identity. But then when we think of identity, do we think of the physical form that appears? So whether it's your race and ethnicity or your hair physicality is part of your identity. Thank you, Izzy. So hair is power as a powerful element of identity. So when we look at hair, there's various factors and history that goes behind that. So as far as religion and culture, hair, you know, is thought to be a source of profound and spiritual power. It's a personal power. So within religions and spaces of faith, this can be seen as a way of communicating, and you know, people would braid their hair to send messages. And if you look at various other faiths and religions, you know, their hairstyles, such as locks, such as, you know, the texture and the styles in which they dress their hair, you know. So this is also part of the culture, but the religious experience. And then when we look at texture, types and styles, when we break it down to the basic form of, you know, what Afro hair is, you know, and the texture, it literally is just your follicle, you know, the way in which the hair grows, and that defines the type. So with that being said, if we look at people with Afro hair type, they have curved hair follicles, and it basically grows up and outwards, and that's how you get that texture and that style. Thank you. Sorry, I'm struggling a little bit. Okay, and then following on from that, as I had mentioned, as far as history is concerned, you know, in Africa, wearing of different hairstyles was used as a means to define roles, you know, hierarchy and statuses. So history, you know, also states that certain communities, it was a way for women to gather together and have that dialogue and socialize. So it's similar to today's salons then, let's just say. And when we think of hair, it's also you know, the styles and the symbolism of those styles, it's passed on from generation to generation. So these hairstyles historically have been here for a very long time. Sorry, a very long time. So when we think of those hairstyles in Western society especially, it hasn't been accepting of these styles and textures, and by the 1700s, negative language was used to describe the hair. So if you've ever heard of the phrases nappy, woolly, ugly, these terms were to dehumanize it and degrade, really. So these attitudes, we can still see them today, and it influences people's perception and those Eurocentric beauty standards that we uphold in today's culture. So that's worth noting that historically, up until today, it's still very much an issue and not seen as beauty standards within the Western culture. Thank you.
Thanks, Rose.
Yeah.
Sorry. So kind of what Soraya's covered is basically the summary of the fact that hair is a really powerful dimension of identity, and it's a factor of identity that not a lot of people recognise or realise. It can be a symbol of your religion, your culture, the way that you feel about yourself. But what we know about identity obviously affects how you hold yourself, the way in which you feel empowered, and it will determine your personal circumstances in a way, but also it affects the ways in which people perceive you as well. So when we look at race and ethnicity, obviously we know that that is a large factor that determines your circumstances, your ability to access certain things, situations, opportunities, and hair can be a good example of that as well. So we've got some case studies here to kind of build upon that point. You may have heard of these stories before. They were in the news, in the press. This first one is from 2020, so really recent, and it's about Ruby. So Ruby is a teenager, and she was repeatedly sent home from school because teachers said her afro hair blocked other pupils from seeing the whiteboard. She was told her hair breached policy, which stated that afro-style hair must be of reasonable size and length. And in her Year 11 yearbook, a photo of her from Year 7 in which she had straight hair was used. So really, really important dimensions to that story, because you've got one aspect of the policies and the structure of the way that institution is built that don't support people that identify with their hair or style their hair in a certain way, or naturally have kind of a genetic disposition to having a certain texture and style of hair. So you've got kind of a structural problem and systematic problem there, but you've also got that kind of indication of Eurocentrism, those Eurocentric standards of European style straight hair that school is feeding into, by feeling that the most professional, most presentable picture to present of Ruby was her Year 7 photo where she presented with straight hair, even though that is a very outdated picture of Ruby. And you'll hear us kind of throwing around these keywords like Eurocentric, whitewashing, things like microaggressions, gaslighting, and it's all really technical language to do with equality, diversity, inclusion, but something that actually is really important to learn as you go along through your working life, and especially in a society today where they're being used more and more, they're being referenced more and more, but thankfully people are building that vocabulary to identify what these mean and how you identify and can use that language. So the second case study is an account from an employee that witnessed a group interview. And she said in one of the interview sessions that I attended, the woman who held the interview, which was Harrods, would go around the room and say, "You need a makeover, you need a makeover, you're fine, you need a makeover." The agent reportedly singled out a black female job candidate and telling her, "You can't work for me unless you have your hair chemically relaxed because your hair, as it is not professional enough." Again, it goes into that really important concept of what is that definition of professional. We'll touch on that a little bit later, but it goes back to those European Eurocentric beauty standards of black women in the workplace, and therefore we can see how these instances and experiences of discrimination and prejudice are slowly starting or can isolate individuals from society and from workplaces. That is really, really regressive. So to kind of build upon that point, I'm sure you've all kind of heard, obviously we know that term discrimination. Workplace discrimination is obviously more specific to that professional environment. But as it is, workplace discrimination on the basis of gender, race, religion, so those protected characteristics that we all know under the Equality Act, is objectively illegal in the UK. But when it comes to racial discrimination related to hair, the lines are blurred, despite it being something black women constantly worry about. A study by the Perception Institute in 2017 found that 1 in 5 black women feel social pressure to straighten their hair for work and are much more likely than white women to feel anxiety over the issue. So immediately there, you've got those systems in place that can't objectively or confidently protect an individual that feels that they're being discriminated against because of their hair, which is a real problem. whether that kind of goes under the lines of covert discrimination, where covert discrimination is a lot harder to identify, and that's where you get those flaws picking up in a workplace, where if you've not got the policies that clearly define what discrimination related to hair can be, how do employers know how to identify that and therefore address it? So you've got that structural issue there, but you've also got that inequality arising, that actually Black women in particular are going to be more and more conscious of this social issue, that they feel they have to preempt a situation to be able to give themselves the best chance in the workplace to be able to succeed. And that's where that anxiety is coming from, doubting your own identity, the way in which you feel confident in expressing yourself through your hair, and feeling that you have to conform to be able to actually achieve and be successful in a role. So just a quick reflection point, as we kind of go through the session, it's just a real opportunity for you to hear the content, hear the things that we're talking about, and start to try and relate that to your own workplace. Is there any parallels that you're seeing? Have you observed any situations like this? And is there anything that you can be doing as an employee or an employer to start these conversations and spark them a bit more about how we identify things like this? So I'll just ask you a quick question to reflect on. So what opportunities may present in your workplace to initiate conversations surrounding identity, to discover the ways in which hair may act as an important symbol of culture, character, religion for an individual, especially when it comes to your peers and your colleagues? So you may think you have a really, really good understanding and knowledge of the person right next to you, but actually if that comes down to a person's favourite colour, their family life, all very really important things, but do you know about how they truly like to identify, what's important to them? And it may be that their hair is a really important and symbolic feature of their character, and how do you go about exploring those conversations to make sure you've got that understanding? So it may be in your break room, you've got a lot of opportunities to do that as you're passing through your desks. Maybe you've got a well-being team bonding day that is a really good opportunity to do that. Or maybe you've got a really open work environment where in your team huddles you can talk about these type of things, and start to be self-critical and reflective on these topics. So again, it goes into that deeper kind of topic of how do we define professional? And firstly, the ways in which we can kind of start to uncover how other people may define professional is often in the language that they're using. We said earlier about those keywords, nappy, ugly, very kind of socially driven language and socially constructed language. Are we being defined by that? Are our mindsets influenced by that kind of unequal whitewashed language that we've been seeing over the decades? And is that therefore defining our own definition of professional? Covert ways of crossing boundaries. So is there an individual around you that you notice is kind of taking it upon themselves to maybe touch or be kind of act on that curiosity of someone's hair without asking that initial question of consent first, to be able to gauge whether they can access that space, and actually the effect that that's going to have on the person at the other end of that? So that's another way of kind of figuring out if someone is often unintentionally crossing those boundaries. Is that an indication of what they feel or deem to be professional in the workplace? And self-reflection on our own biases is really, really vital. It's one of those things that we always say, if it's unconscious, how do we know to question it if we don't know anything is there or a problem exists? But that's why self-reflection is always really important. It may be that we think we have no influence, we've had no negative influence in our mindset, but actually if we take it a step back a bit and think about how we've gotten here in this situation and all the things that could have impacted our mindsets, the way we've been raised, the people we've been exposed to, the conversations we've had or not had, how have we gotten here to think the way that we do? And then it goes on to how do we address kind of that protection of hair as identity in the workplace. And one of those things that is really important is having that structural kind of infrastructure behind you in the workplace. So having an inclusive and progressive work environment and culture, and part of that involves having advanced policies and procedures behind you. Are those policies and procedures clearly defining what all the different ways that discrimination can present itself, other than just being those overt instances? What does covert discrimination look like, and how does hair come into that? And professional learning and training is always so vital. Professional learning is one of those things where there will always be something to learn. There will always be something to update your mind on. And so building and maintaining that momentum is really important when it comes to these conversations. And most importantly, when you're having that professional learning session, not just making those notes and having that initial self-reflection, but taking it outside of the workroom, taking it outside into your social situations that you're in, back to your family, and carrying on those conversations is really, really vital. So a big part of our work comes under policy. And what we do is we support organisations and individuals to kind of assess and review the existing policy structure that they have and see whether there's any ways that we can be a bit more inclusive in the way that we address things, and make sure that we're supporting employees and employers in the best way that we can by having that policy behind us. So that's something that hair discrimination can be really protected by. You may have heard something like the HALO code, which is a specific almost code of conduct that institutions sign up to identify that no employee or employer or stakeholder of that organisation will be discriminated against because of their hair. And that specifically goes to different textures and styles of hair, that biases won't be presented against. So policy is a really, really vital strand of that work for an organisation that is important to get right, and also to be constantly updating, to be informed by other people by, and to be co-produced. So kind of lastly, a final reflection question. In a nation where we've got a large anti-racist agenda and general equality agenda, what are you doing individually to work towards that as an anti-racist Wales? What's your part to play in that? Not just as an organisation, maybe you're here as an employer, maybe you're here as a member of a senior management team, so kind of that top-down structure. But as an individual, what are you doing to actively embody anti-racism, anti-racist work, and a critical lens and an intersectional lens on the ways in which we treat people, understand each other, and really make sure that we can understand and identify identity when the context is right. So that's kind of us today with the content. Obviously, always happy to be contacted with any questions. As I say, this is a really, really small taster of the type of things that we cover in a full-length programme. So please do get in touch if you wanted to know a bit more about the full-length programmes that we can offer that are truly more bespokely catered to a workplace and can kind of really delve into those topics that are important for an employer and an employee. But finally, I'll kind of just open the floor at this point. If anyone would like to put their hands up, ask any questions about the content, or have anything that they'd like to clarify, or just have any thoughts on what we've spoken about today, please do raise your hand, pop something in the chat. We'd be happy to talk to you about it. Thank you.
Do we have any questions?